Hello, this is Odomne, and you're on the YouTube channel of the internet's most notorious ginger man, Thorin.
I'll tell you what, while I've got a spare minute, why don't I check out what they're talking about on Reddit? Nico is a good in-game leader though, because a betting company made a video where a player that wasn't on Nico's team said he's underrated at it though. So how about that? Drink this, gamer subs. Has nootropics to help you focus. I think I feel something. Wait a minute. Why would a pro player's opinion outweigh the facts, the context revealed as a totality, and my own attempt at reflection on this matter? Thanks, gamer subs. Not too bad, eh? Why don't we take a look at Twitter? No. Bengi is the greatest jungler of all time because he won 3 world championships and he was just as important as Faker at winning those championships. That's why they only won the world championship together. Drink this, gamer subs. It's sugar-free. Oh, damn. Now that I'm not on my sugar high, I realised I was getting a bit ahead of myself. I mean, I guess I'd need to consider the context of Bengi's role as a jungler, why he was repeatedly benched multiple times after 2014, and how self-sufficient Faker was as a mid laner. This stuff works. Don't be a pleb. Drinking gamer subs won't guarantee you are cured, but it can help you focus. So maybe you can pay attention to what I'm saying in these videos and think about it. Come to your own conclusions. If you want to try gamer subs, then use my code Thorin for 10% off your order at gamersubs.gg. Right, it's time for another one of my Patreon AMAs. I do them roughly every month, but I try to double up sometimes to make up for some of the past ones I missed way back in the day. Anyone who donates $10 or more, any of those tiers can ask a question. You can do it in the thread that you'll find in the description box, or you can do it on Discord. If you've got the appropriate, as long as you connect your Discord account to your Patreon, you'll be able to go into the right channel and put the questions there where people sometimes do. By the way, I also have a clips channel. Subscribe to that if you just want short bite-sized ones where it's just topics from my shows, my interviews, etc., rather than having to watch the entire thing. Okay, number 1. Barbara Stanwick's Legs says, did you miss me? Because this is someone who used to be a patron and then had to stop for a while. Quite frankly, the short answer is no. Like, I'm not going to lie and pretend like you're some friend of mine or something. But you know what? You did mainly submit Quake-related questions, which can be fun to talk about, even if I'm sure they're a little bit obscure, a little bit out there for some people. But yeah, that was fun to talk about at times. So sort of, I guess. Girthy Moth says, do you think an esports version of Barstool Sports, digital sports media company that produces humorous content focused on sports and pop culture, could succeed in the current esports landscape? If you were to build an esports media company, who from esports would you employ to get started? Yes, quite frankly, I think it's an obvious actual pivot that nearly all sorts of media should try and go towards, where it's based around personalities. That's why you watch. It's not just for what they can provide in the content. It's like the person providing the content. You follow them and their opinions, and you get to know them just as you would a TV character or a sports star for that matter. So I think that's a more interesting way to go, the world of like talking, opinions, that sort of content. So in my opinion, I actually think not only is it something that could succeed, but it's actually something you'll very likely see from me in the future, especially, as you mentioned, the whole angle that the pop culture part coming in. Like, I personally plan to potentially branch out and do some things within sports. I'm already doing some sports writing for Pinnacle, maybe do some pop culture stuff. Obviously, in these AMAs, I sometimes answer questions from sort of outside the world of esports. But yeah, I think there's definitely room for that, and I think it's quality content that you could still make. Now, the obvious people I would pick to do stuff like that, I'm thinking more on the sides of doing the pop culture side and doing more stuff like based on personalities. There'll be people who have great personalities. So if it's in the game, it's going to be people like, let's think, obviously you'd have someone like Anders, if it was CSGO and all this crazy stuff, like not only the stuff in CS where he has his mind for the smokes and the boosts and all the crazy angles that he gets hyped about, but also, you know, the guy knows a lot about like some very weird sort of fringe topics that might be interesting to people, or it could also potentially get the whole channel banned, I guess. I'd obviously pick someone like Dom. Is a pretty good person. I mean, you already see from his own. The problem with him is you'd have to pay him megabucks and make him go and do this on your channel. But if you could do that, look at the content he already makes, almost throwaway on his stream that now thankfully gets to YouTube and gets to clips, etc. Some of that's great shit, like historical stuff, current stuff. He can basically run the gamut pretty much. He's probably the most impressive ex-pro, I think. In terms of like being able to maybe branch out and do some pop culture stuff, that would be very interesting in the sense of I'd like to have someone like Monty to do some philosophy stuff or some literature stuff. Someone like Froscorin. Now listen, it would have to be if I wasn't doing it, because she's not going to do it with me and I'm not going to do it with her. But if you don't know, she has sort of some hidden depths in terms of some of the things she's into and how she likes to interpret and critique art, put it that way, film, cinema, TV, etc. Richard Lewis is an obvious one. He has very broad interests in movies, comedy, politics, all sorts of things like that, including, by the way, Russian literature. Semler's an obvious one. Semler has other interests as well. Sci-fi, you might not know that. He's super into sci-fi books. He knows a decent amount, not really necessarily about politics, but more like political philosophy and theory. It's quite interesting. Obviously, I could do loads of stuff. Ask Blaster 2000. In recent events, Nintendo has shut down multiple tournaments, including a Melee Major. Is there any way for an esports community to operate without disturbances from a developer? This seems especially insane considering the developer doesn't even sell the game anymore, 19-year-old game, contributes zero money to the scene and gets free publicity for their game. Right, the simple answer, and I actually did a video on this topic, is no, due to the way that IP rights and IP law works, intellectual property, the fact that it's a digital medium and it's online and you technically don't own the game and they've just leased it to you, all the TOS that you sign. This is different from like buying a cow from someone in the medieval period or something. So the issue is, basically, I don't think it can be done on a low level. You have to hope someone like Valve just leaves you alone. But that's a luxury of them having the strength to have the luxury to allow you and to mercifully let you do what you want. You don't really have any say in that. So the real issue is, I feel like inevitably what's going to have to happen is once esports gets enormous as an industry, people will group together, people like TOs, people like team organizations, people like the top players. They'll pool money, they'll do some sort of a class action. That's not really the term, I'm not really a lawyer. They'll do some sort of a group lawsuit where the idea is they'll try and claim that their performance within the game, using the tool of the game, is what is actually creating their job and what they're trying to show off, not the actual game itself. Like League of Legends, the game, isn't what makes Faker the best player in League of Legends ever. He is what did that. The game had to exist. We acknowledge that. There should be some IP rights, in my opinion. There should be some ownership and some property elements. But I think that's kind of a bit whack myself. Problem with that, of course, is the whole world sort of going further towards the angle that you don't really own anything. At least the online media, like, let's say, Anglosphere world, maybe China as well, I don't know. It's kind of going away from the idea that you own stuff, right? For very obvious, somewhat Orwellian reasons. So maybe you can't really pit against it. I don't know. I'm not really in that world. GDMN, I sense similarities between this video series and Terence McKenna's audience questions after his bardic lectures. If Terence had a Patreon AMA these days, what are some questions you might have for him? If you would prefer to hypothetically interview him in your own style, what are the topics you would try to drive the discussion to? Right, I actually would agree. I mean, I've obviously listened to pretty much everything that ever has been released that had Terence McKenna on it, and basically he could sort of just freestyle really long answers that are kind of like a Thorin's Thoughts type video to questions that, now a lot of them was quite similar, but some of them that he'd never heard before were about topical events or whatever, because he's just a super interesting guy and he knew his own mind and he knew how to talk, he knew how to rap, as he would say, he knew how to just flow and be able to come off the top. So yeah, it's sort of a skill I have. It's one I've certainly developed. It's one that he certainly inspired me or made me realise was possible. I think that's what's different about me. A lot of people listen to his lectures or whatever, and these AMA sessions you're talking about, and they go, wow, how does he do it? Oh, it's so incredible. I just go, how do I do that? How do I level it up? Oh, that's possible. Cool, let's go do it. That's the difference in my mentality. So what I would say is, I won't go super into detail because some of the topics are shit that are potentially in the modern day, it's probably even dodgy to talk about on YouTube. But I would just say, I'd love to get like more historical perspectives. People don't necessarily know because he was so well read and in such weird niche ways. I'd love to get his thoughts on some of the things that were like weird historical. I'd love to know what he thought about like some of the stuff that happened in like Japanese culture in the 20th century, let's say, for example. Or how about like what he thought about like Central Europe and like the era of the knights and the medieval period and some of the things of like, you know, feudalism and stuff. Some of these things I think will be really fascinating. In terms of stuff that we can't ask him because he was dead and he's missed, I'd love to get in the light of the modern day where counterculture is overtly, if you just even vaguely know where to look, like, oh, wait a minute, my favourite bands that are all rebels and all the people who call themselves activists and protesters and rebels all have the same opinions as the transnational corporations and the big scumbag politicians. This doesn't add up. If you do that, then you'll obviously see that, like, I'd love to know, since I know that he understands that there was some level of failure in the 60s counterculture, which already isn't what it was presented as anyway, but again, we're not going to go too far down the rabbit hole in this one. But I'd like to see, since a lot of that was like subvert, or covert rather, how it was done and subverted the movement, I'd like to know if he looked at the modern day stuff right now, what would he take on that? Like, would he get drawn into a bunch of the idpol BS, or would he see through it and have his own unique perspective? Because by the way, the circles that he ran in, some of those people, that's one thing that shocks me, is some of those people consider themselves like free thinkers, they're into some conspiracy stuff, but then in the modern day, even they've been scared away by the watchdogs by a lot of stuff. It's very bizarre the way some of the people who, like, 6-7 years ago, you had in this one camp, and they don't know that it's sort of like the world moved and their camp as a result's in a different place, but they think that they're still in the same spot and they're the same person. So I'd like to know that. I mean, for me, the good thing about Terence McKenna is I don't have to agree or think he's right in all the stuff he says, or even most of this, or any of the stuff. I just find people like that interesting. They have a coherent, complete perspective on the world. It's why I've always enjoyed people like LS, Monty, some of the people I've worked with that I don't mention by name now. Xenodwarf says, you are put in charge of your own fictional nation state as God Emperor Thorin. Finally. What will it be called? Who in the CS talent would you appoint to key positions and why? Secretary of Defense, Treasurer, Head of Media, Head of Police, and any other positions you think you might need for your glorious reign. So I would call it something just witty, like the Sovereign State of Skrill. It's pretty cool, right? S3 for short. And then Secretary of Defense, I'm going to actually go with Semler for that. Like, the obvious one I first thought for this was Richard Lewis, because he's a person where usually if he goes on the warpath, and usually if he prescribes that we've got to do something, it's usually right, and he is the guy that will sort of hold the line when otherwise, you know, the barbarians are at the gates, as it were. The problem is, I'm going to pick him for a different role, I've decided. So, since I need to fill a bunch of these roles. So I'm actually going for that one, I'm going to take Semler. And even though Semler can certainly get caught up in emotion and fly off the handle a little bit, you guys maybe don't know this publicly. I'm just talking about as a general person. He's a guy who's a very passionate guy. He gets really revved up and excitable. The thing is, I do think ultimately he has a really good sense of where the line is that you can't let people go past. He did a great job of this as a caster, and he was one of the main people who helped us push forward the rates and the conditions and getting our own hotel rooms and better flights and like proper actual like talent managers that brought us decent food and didn't records. Like, he's a key person. That's so he always understood how to walk the line of maintaining all the relationships, something I don't always do, but getting something that you didn't get before, negotiating and pushing deals forwards, but then also knowing when to back off, when to give up like a sort of like a sacrificial victory to the opponent to give them like a feel that they're getting something. I had a very good sense of that. So as a Secretary of Defense, I need this guy to know, when do we need to go to war? When do we need to maintain the border in a certain sense against a foreign enemy? I'd need this guy to help me kind of like nail that down. He also has a way better sense of his overall principles than a lot of other people, because most people just don't sit down and think about these things. They're not ancient Greek philosophers, are they? Treasurer would have to be Lurpis, or Tommy, as he's now called from the IGC. He's just a guy who's got a very, very rational, logical mind, very good with like math, financial aspects. Also, I suspect he wouldn't do criminal stuff, which these roles are notorious for being filled with. So as long as he's under me and I'm the leader of the state in that sense, I think this guy would do a fantastic job. So one of the reasons why I'm very skeptical that within IGC he's at all wrong on some of these major issues, especially when people say he's lying. I think instead what happened is he is driving a hard bargain, and he is not letting certain things happen that other people trying to kiss the player's ass and not understanding that you can walk away from the table when the deal doesn't suit you. Basically, he's a guy who just has very set in place way of working and mentality towards things, and I think it would be great in terms of economic position. Head of media, I would actually pick Maniac for that, and the reason why I say that is because to me, Maniac is one of the most amiable people I have ever met, but more so even the people like Moses, in the sense that because he has that accent, which is so soothing to the English language speaking ear. He also speaks fantastically fluent English. I'm going to guess probably other languages just for a laugh as well, because he comes from Switzerland. He also has a great demeanour, like a sort of bedside manner. So if he had to deliver bad news, if he had to deliver something really important, he's a guy who can switch between them, and he can soft sell something. He can make it like easily and palatable, or he could like deliver it. He's not really that great at doing like harsh stuff, but he could deliver it in like a stern way, like a serious way. I think he'd be a really good guy in terms of like he'd win people over. They'd want to hear what he had to say, and they'd give him the time of day. And obviously I'd need someone to present some of my ideas in that way to certain elements of my country, right? Head of police, I referenced it earlier. I'm going to take Richard Lewis for this one. There's a guy who has a very strong sense of ethics, who understands like the concept of like rehabilitation, of allowing people to make mistakes and then potentially come back from those, but at the same time punishing people for crimes and offences they have done, and understands where the severity maybe should be. Has a very good mind for investigation, of course, so you could also like lead them to new insights in that regard. For Secretary of Education, I'm actually going to add that role. I'm going to add Anders for that because he's into so much crazy stuff that I think he would design a really interesting curriculum for kids. He's got his own kids now that he's working with. For kids and young people to study, which would be 100 times better than the sort of BS that comes from the US that's permeated the whole world, when no longer does the teacher just teach you the subject. They teach you a curriculum, and that's all super homogenized now. Last one I decided to throw in is I'm going to put Minister of the Arts, and I would actually pick Maui Snake for that because he's a guy who, first of all, operates from like a philosophical position that I enjoy, which is you go to first principles, you go down to your most basic, like core understandings of the world, and then you build up from that to understand something, figure out what you think of it, which is right, what's wrong, etc. Also, in terms of art, like he's a guy who can be a little bit pretentious, but that's because he's striving to like really have a broad sense of like movies, books, all sorts of things. He's a guy who can hold like different opinions that he thinks in his mind and consider. So I think it'd be a great guy for that sort of position. Again, you don't want anyone who's got like a bias, one bent, and a censorship angle who's going to be in that sort of position. Madman2980 says, "Hey Thorin, I only recently started watching League of Legends esports in 2019, and I know that historically you have been a fan of players like sOAZ, Froggen, Name, and Flame, among others. I was wondering if you could point me towards great games or series these players played in that were entertaining or showcased what made them so good back in their day." Right, that's one of those questions. It's a good question, but it's so in-depth. I actually have, let's just give me an idea. Maybe I'll make a sub-series where I pick out one or two of the questions that come to this Q&A, and basically I just do a whole video on that one topic. Maybe it's like you can almost, like, maybe I'll do a vote for it, a poll maybe on the site, because this is one way, if I did it in a lot more depth, it'd be a lot more interesting. But then again, I also might do some of this as content, quite frankly. I'll probably do a piece on some of these aspects. Like, if they are really my favorite players, maybe I should pick out like the classics or the ones that showcase, as you say, the style and what they're doing. So I'm going to do this off the top of my head now, because if not, if I do it as a full piece, I'm definitely not just going to blow it in the middle of one of these. Like, I should just do it as my own video and make my own money off that. So how about this? We'll talk about what each player sort of represents to me, and then we'll try and figure out like where to look, at least signposts, and maybe even pick out some games if I can remember them. So we'll start with the order you went in. We'll go with sOAZ. sOAZ is a player where, especially in the early days, obviously top lane at the time could be all these carry champions and AP champions. He was a guy who was famous, even in an era when a lot of people played a lot of different stuff in top lane, for having a champion ocean, and especially being a master of like first timing or playing like an unusual matchup no one else plays. He's a guy who, in later times, was a monster at being a sacrificial player on the bruisers and the tanks. He's a guy who got a very, very strong understanding of macro knowledge throughout most of League of Legends. Basically, from the time he joined Fanatic onwards, he's had a fantastic mind, probably the best ever from the top lane, for understanding how to play the map and how to play with your win conditions. So I would say, if we're going to kind of cover the gamut here, if you want to go and see the crazy stuff where he's playing anything and everything, go to Season 3 and Season 4, and you'll find series where sOAZ just plays 5 different champions and plays stuff that isn't even played that often, or just plays Lulu a bunch of games where you're like, what the hell? And it's just to get other people ahead and just to make expect here be like a monster, or Reckless be a monster in the team fight. So I would say this, if we want to go with the old school stuff, like IPL sort of era when he was in Fnatic, Season 3 EU LCS, I know in the spring there was a semi-final he had against Evil Geniuses, Froggen, those guys, Crepo, Snoopy, that he was like an absolute monster and he was just thrashing them with all sorts of different champions. When he was in Origin, if we want to go more towards like the middle period of his career, I would say when he played in the Season 5 summer final against Fnatic, the unbeaten Fnatic, where he took them to the limit with his gangplank. It was really impressive. If we want the latter day stuff, where he's a monster sacrificial player and then knows how to use macro, I would say the classic, I always reference it, but a lot of people have never seen it because it was just group stage games. Go and watch Week 2, so as in the 4th, 5th and 6th games, and then the 7th, that Fnatic played in their group at Season 7 Worlds, where they had to do a miracle comeback, and he was just hard winning games almost by himself. Like, this was real, like, anime genius character level shit. It was amazing. Froggen, I think of lane mastery, prowess. I think of being ungankable, really good at team fighting and outputting damage while staying alive, like walking that line very finely. Really good mage play, making his matchups work, deciding the champions he wants and then making the matchups he wants to work, whether they're meta or not, like his Anivia post Season 4. So for me, let's go back, way back in time to when he was the best player in the world. Any series that CLG EU wins in 2012 practically is probably going to have Froggen being an absolute monster. Like, if you want to see him play stuff that's totally out of left field for the modern day conception of Froggen, go and watch the Lone Star Clash 2, where he was playing champions like Lee Sin, Lux, Kog'Maw, AP, and he was just dominating everyone. Like, nobody could do anything against him at that point in time. Then if you want to see some aspects like the middle period, when he was still a very, very strong player and had really mastered his style, go to Season 4 Summer Split. Almost any game Alliance wins, he probably carries. They win, again, the majority of the games against every opponent in the league. And then the final against Fanatic, yeah, he also has some games where he just styles on, at the time, the greatest Western team ever, perhaps. Season 9, I would say go and look at any of the games, spring or summer, where he plays champions like Karthus, Vel'Koz. Again, you're going to see all of the strengths on display here, even ones that stem back at this point in time. We're talking like 7 years, still present in 2019, still one of the best mid laners in the West. Now, when I say one of the best, I don't mean like number 1. He's probably like number 5 or number 6 at the time, if we're being realistic. For Name, it's key to remember that Name in 2013 went under the alias Devil, and at the time was a very different player. At the time, he was this oozy-eyed mechanical monster, young player coming up, breakout star, carrying his team from the bot lane. And so I'd say go and watch the Season 3 LPL Summer Final, if you can find it, between Positive Energy, which was Name's team at the time, where he was just hard carrying, against OMG, the best Chinese team at that time, who displaced the guys from World Elite. And in this series, like, he is hard carrying on Vayne in an Uzi-esque fashion. I mean, this is before Uzi had actually really become a true monster, and before he'd even had Season 3 Worlds Finals. Then he goes to EDG as Name, and now he's a controlled AD carry. Yeah, he has his issues in lane, but he knows how to sort of get past those, and he is a god tier team fighter. So I would say for the EDG period, any games where he plays Lucian in Season 4 and any of, quite frankly, his whole career, he was still good on that, even in King and RNG in sort of 2015 and 2016. I would say one series to pick out from memory would be the Season 4 Spring Final against IG. This was the series where, after watching it, me and Monty not only discovered Froscorin, but we also said, this guy is the best AD carry in the world. And quite frankly, I think he was. And this was in the era when Imp and Deft, at the time, were experiencing career peaks. For Flame, I would say you think of lane dominance. Another ungankable player, but this time from top lane. Amazing 1v2. Amazing under the tower at escaping or making one of the players die. Great at team fighting. Maybe the best ever. Amazing carry play. It's where the Flame Horizon comes from, where you get like 100 CS up on your opponent. So to me, if you want the Flame Horizon and the classic Flame, you go to the era when he was the best player in the world, which was the spring of 2013, and an OGN at the end of the group stage, going into the first couple of rounds of the playoffs, his team went on a 13-game winning streak, and he is a monster. He is the best player in this, although I'll certainly give credit to Ambition for being a very good star player as well. They were kind of like a 1A, 1B scenario, sort of like LeBron and Dwayne Wade when they were in the Heat in the early 2010s. So go and watch champions like Kennen, Diana, Shyvana. In the later in his career, Renekton. So I'll also say, just for like, I mean, this one just is more like, it just shows like a star trying to carry against a better team. I'd say go watch the OGN Summer quarterfinal against KTB at the time. I don't know if they were KT Bullets at the time when they changed the name. That was just a fantastic series, and he really does everything he can to win this one for his team. They just can't get over the line. If you want to see the latter day Flame in terms of like once the era of having to play tanks since Bruises in the top lane instead of just straight carries came along and he was still on a good team, go and watch Neo Blaze in spring 2014 when they finished 4th and made it all the way and took close series and were playing rather into game 5s against like Najin Shield and Samsung White. That's right, the Samsung White that won Worlds. It took them to 5 games when everyone said all these players were washed. And this is a guy, again, on Renekton, Shyvana, he is just must-watch League of Legends top lane play. Like, fantastic play. Even though at the time, everyone said, oh, no, you should play the game like Looper and like Acorn. Like, all I'll say is go back and watch the games now and tell me, if he plays like Looper or Acorn there, do Emperor and Ambition carry the game and win the series for them? Bullshit they do. Peyton Lee Trahan says, hi, Thorin. I've been wanting to get into the Dota scene, but do not know where to start. Should I just wait for the next TI, or do you have any tournaments I should look out for? Right, I already did a video on this topic of my favourite TI runs, so go watch those series and those runs, and you'll get a sense for some of the storylines, some of the epic matches, some of the great players, some of the amazing matches that took place in history. I'll pick out a couple that spring to mind immediately, like, you know, bona fide classics from Dota 2. So if you want to go more old school, go go and watch the TI final from 2014, the Alliance versus Na'Vi one. Like, that is some epic stuff. Really impressive. Those were the number 1, number 2 teams in the world, effectively. They'd already had an epic rivalry, and this series it was really high quality. I mean, some of the games were back and forth. I win one hard, you win one hard, but then the nature of how that made the series so tense, and always had both teams and both teams' fans thinking anyone could win the next game. It was some really epic stuff. For more recent stuff, the obvious one is go and watch TI 8, the 2018 one, the upper bracket final between OG and LGD, and then go watch the PSG LGD, and then go watch the grand final between them. And these are some of the closest, some of the most epic, some of the most brilliant games that Dota ever played. Amazing. If you just want great teams to start following and see their careers, if you want to see like an all-star team of Chinese greats, who they're probably maybe the greatest team to never win TI, Team DK in 2014, monsters at every position. Vici Gaming in 2015, I was a big fan of with How and those guys, FY. LGD 2018, the one I referenced before, another amazing team. And if you want one that actually did win TI, how about EG from 2015, where they'd lost Arteezy, but look how they coped without him. Look how PPD band-aided stuff. Look how he used the meta against people or found fixes during a tournament to win his game. The tournament, like, just brilliant stuff. And the way that the 3, 4, and 5 positions played in that team, just fucking amazing. Matthew Underwood, have you ever gotten into Jackie Chan movies? It seems that his older work embodies a conflux of some things you are interested in. He's a self-described idiot who carved out an incredible niche for himself through insane dedication and courage, became a master. The movies he made were completely devoid of pretension. They are blue-collar entertainment perfected. No shot is wasted, and most contain at least 2 entertaining things going on at once. Fair enough, pretty good description. Anyway, here are a few that are lesser known in the West that I consider his best. Dragons Forever, Miracles, and The Young Master. Right, not really. Like, listen, I've watched a bunch of Jackie Chan movies, especially earlier in my youth, but they're not really my sort of thing. Like, I do like action movies, but I like them to sort of have like an intelligent storyline behind them, like Terminator 2 or Total Recall or something. I'm not really as much a fan when it's more like slapstick stuff, which is kind of the comedy that those movies tended to be like, or it's just the action, you know, like just the action. Like, I was never a big fan of Steven Seagal movies, for example. So to me, like, yeah, I thought they were all right movies, like Drunken Master, Rumble in the Bronx, like the classics, you know. But with that said, though, your story was cool. You certainly put an interesting hook there. Maybe I end up watching one of the 3 you recommended. Connor Ruback says, if you were in charge of building an esports museum and there was a section for every major esport until present, which games, matches, teams would you focus on being the main attractions? Right, I won't go too in-depth on this because there's another one that could have been its own video itself. So I'll say the games I would feature primarily would be the Quake series, Counter-Strike series, Dota series, StarCraft series, and Warcraft 3. I think those are the most important games in the history of esports for many different reasons. Have the best storylines, the best champions, the best tournaments, the best history, blah, 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 all the rest of it. So in Quake, I mean, there was obviously a million classics like QuakeCon 2010 final between Cooler and Cypher, Thresh versus Immortal, Thresh versus Reptile, PGL from back in the 90s. Who else are we going to go for? Let's see, Quake 3, we're going to go with like Fatality in a bunch of series. Hard to know which one, probably him against 0-4, QuakeCon 2002. We'll watch 0-4 play a bunch of championships, 2001 WCG final against Lexa. Obviously for CS, there's too many for this. Like, you get the general gist though. I'll throw in a couple more though. For CS, I would probably feature like Again versus Fanatic, WCG 2009 final. I would like to have something like, I'm trying to think of some more old. Oh, obviously Nip versus X3 from CPL Winter 2001. Let's pick maybe one more. Maybe do like Game Online against Team 3D from CPL Winter 2002, the upper bracket final on Inferno, which was a really exciting game, back and forth. And it's what kind of showed that like a Moto-led top NA team was a different caliber from what you'd had like, you know, 6 months earlier in NA at that point in time. So for Dota, I mean, I've already referenced some earlier. For StarCraft, there's a million classic ones there. Put almost any final like Flash and Jaedong played would be epic. Boxer versus Yellow series, I Love Uv and Saviors matches, and I Love Uv and July Zerg's matches, I Love Uv versus anyone who was Terran Zerg, rather, is an obvious one. Savior games against Protoss, just how genius he was on the map. For Warcraft 3, almost everything Moon did. It's pretty obvious answer, some grubby games. Jack Charpentier says, thoughts on Reckless as a player? Right, it's obviously, like, normally I don't mind these questions, but it's a bit too vague for what's an enormous topic. So I'll just say this. I do have plans to make some in-depth content on exactly that topic in the coming months. So I'll just give you a brief summary of his career. Right, at the end of Season 2, so in the off-season before Season 3, he comes in, he plays those tournaments where they win DreamHack Winter, and they come second at IPL 5 in Fanatic. At this point in time, he was a good player when ADCs were super strong, but he was playing with, like, very, very good sOAZ and Expecate, and he was good, but he was still, like, he was sort of just behind them, but still very good at his position. Admittedly, he had everything given to him. Season 3 and Season 4, he was a good AD carry, certainly one of the best AD carries in the league. He just wasn't the best, or wasn't like a star from AD carry position, in my opinion. And I think at times he got carried. That's why I call him the passenger. Then you go to Season 5. On elements, he's fairly crap, actually, and he really just gives up. Then he comes back to Fnatic, and he knows he has to earn his way back in, so he just gets carried, basically, and just what they say. Just farms out, basically. Season 6, he has some serious issues, but he starts to improve them a little bit, especially towards the summer. Season 7, he has that really weird start where he's using that weird, like, Kennen band-aid all the time, which he's winning on, but it's a weird band-aid. But then he really starts to embrace, like, the idea that if he doesn't hard carry from ADC, they're not going to have any chance, and becomes a monster by the summer. Season 7 summer, Reckless might be my favourite in all of League of Legends history. Then you come to Season 8 to Season 10, when he was playing with the lineup that was Caps, and those players around, and then basically just Caps, and later Brox are removed. Right, obviously the EDG series in the quarterfinals of Worlds Season 8, I think he was the one that carried that series, not Caps. I thought Caps actually had some big problems. I mean, he's obviously a monster in the last Worlds round of 8 against TES, top esports. Arguably deserved to win the series. What I liked about this era was, it's more like he combines the two. He, like, picks his spots. So if he has a Caps or someone going ham, he lets them, or depending on his champion. But then he also definitely has, like, so obviously the TES series, like, aggressive series, much more proactive series, much more aggressive in terms of picks and what he wants. And he also is way more consistent and really good internationally, pretty much. So yeah, I think actually he sort of mastered the game around this period of time and combined all elements. But I still think as a person, he's a bit of a shithead. So whatever. We'll get into that another time, maybe. The big one. How good was Happy as an individual? In this aspect, how does he compare to names such as GetRight, Shox, Olafmeister, Coldzera, etc.? Right, that's a really tricky question to answer because he wasn't quite at the level of those players when they were at their peak and they were, like, arguing the best player in the world. But he was sort of like a tier below when he was at his prime, like latter part of 2014, early 2015. So think maybe of if we were on LAN and they were having the online results they'd had, but even better online results on LAN. Think of if Complexity were monsters, what Blame F would be considered now. He's considered the star of the team, right? But Blame F hasn't won a major. Happy won 2 majors. So I think you've got to factor that in. So you got a lot of credit for that in the same way Blame F would if he won a major as the best fragger on the team. The issue for me is that the style he had was very gimmicky, being like a hard lurker and sending a death ball of 4 people elsewhere. And then once they attack the site, you either kill the rotators or occasionally you do a proper flank behind them, not that often, or you just rotate behind them and come back into the site. The problem is, he didn't do enough of the pushing behind. He wasn't proactive enough on his lurks, in my opinion. So I think the way you lurk generally, Threat made a very good comment about this on the recent strat book. If you're just going to lurk passively and just let them go past and only kill them if they come to rotate, all you're really doing there is if they'd have run into the site and died, you lost the round anyway. So you've already won the round somewhat by actually taking over the site. You're just sort of winning a little bit harder. Like, it's not really that great an approach generally anyway. So in my opinion, it's more about comms, reading the map, checking that someone can't flank you. It's like an extended flank position, basically. And at its best, should be combined with the attack on the site to actually flank behind people and aggressively backstab and stop them so that they can't as quickly rotate and retake the site. He didn't really do that very often, though. And so while at the time it worked, it was sick and got him lots of frags. He was mainly more a GetRight style, like passive one, where he just killed them when they came into him. But GetRight would at least do the flank half the time. And so while it worked, it was sick. But when it stopped working like a motherfucker. So very overrated in the latter years. But certainly for a year or so, very good individually. And if you want to go like a year and a half, go back to the LDLC period before, with Maniac and all those guys, I actually thought he was a very good in-game leader at that point in time. Django Tango says, what are your thoughts on the state of colour casting in League of Legends? At Worlds, it felt like the analysis was top tier, but the storytelling / entertainment value was lacking. Right, I think it's good overall, but I don't think there's many elite talents though, because most of them left to other games or migrated to different positions. I think that people like Ellis and Froscorin, who also took those roles up in key regions, are just better on the desk. They're better as desk analysts. I agree. I think the storytelling's fairly shit. I mean, we can even go back to 29 for that. Like, think about when G2 beat SKT, and apparently I think it was Ender who said this. I'm usually actually enjoying, although more in 2010 to be fair, 2020 rather, where he did that whole thing where when G2 beat SKT, I'm assuming MSI, I think, he was like, the best team in history. It's like, wait a minute, there's only Faker on that team, bruh. Like, that's like if the Lakers in 2006, when they lost to the Suns in the first round of the playoffs, if the commentator was like, and have beaten the 3-time champions, in the terms of the Lakers, because they had the 3-peat era when Kobe was there, but he was the only player remaining pretty much. Like, that's just a bit whack to me. Like, I think they certainly, the problem they have in terms of the storytelling is they still seem, pure speculation, to do that angle of like, I'm going to decide a storyline and then crowbar it to fit you, because I think this is a cool storyline. I've always said, if you're a good writer, the story suggests itself. So you draw the essence of the player and the team and the situation out and then make that the storyline. Like, they don't do a very good job with that. But the problem is, Riot basically, almost ideologically, like, basically they're just against the kinds of people that you'd need to do a good job of that sort of storytelling. Like me, Monty, others in the Dom maybe, Loco, I don't know about Loco maybe. So the problem is that we're almost the antithesis to what Riot wants. So they're never going to hire us. So you're never going to get this. It's almost inherent that it'll never be the case, in my opinion. Kristen says, with Twists announcing his departure from Team Liquid, by the way, I did a video of Fallen joining, how do you think MSL would be as a replacement if Team Liquid was looking for an IGL? Right, I like that move, actually, in terms of for MSL, because he had some amazing pieces to use. And if he had pieces that good, ooh, that would be very interesting. Like, put it this way, if he filled with a team like that, I'd certainly have to consider, did I overrate certain aspects of him? Not entirely, like, he doesn't just retcon all of history. But the problem I have is, I don't think it's the right team for him. Like, I don't think they want to run his system. I don't think they want to run hard strats. I don't think they want to run set roles, set timings. Like, it's not really their style. So if he can win them over, sure. But the issue is, he's not really a guy I necessarily know can get someone to buy into his system. I think they have to just sort of already agree he's legit and then want to do it. So that might not actually be his strength in terms of selling it to him in that regard. I also think Team Liquid, I don't hate it as a move, but I also think Fallen just makes more sense for right now for what they actually need. Especially, by the way, because you just know MSL would AWP. Latoic, in your Reflections episode with Veggie on, well, whatever, you give the date, you asked him about his early days as a jungler, and throughout his answer, he often referred to himself as a shot caller. In some of your more recent content, you've alluded to making a video about players who are good at X role versus players who understand how to win. This made me think about the roles in CSGO versus the roles in LOL. The primary roles in CSGO, Fragger, Support, IGL, AWP, Lurker, seem to define a set of behaviours in a very fluid and dynamic way. Well done, you've nailed that, because if you notice, every moron, and even some idiots in the industry, act as though they're static, oftentimes incorporating sub-roles, like secondary AWP into a primary one. On the flip side, the roles, top, jungle, mid, ADC, and support, in League of Legends seem more static and less dynamic. Consider the, yeah, you get the premise anyway. So basically, he wants to know, notwithstanding how fundamentally different the two games are, there is some overlap in what you want to accomplish as a team that goes beyond simply being in the right lane with the right champion. With that in mind, how do you change the 5 roles in League of Legends to reflect what role ought to be doing to try and win? E.g., instead of queuing for mid or jungle, you could queue a shot caller for solo queue. Yeah, okay, I'll give this a go. How about this, right? I'll basically make a new role, and I'm going to give more than 5 so you can make different compositions. And the idea is you declare one of these. The enemy team wouldn't see it. They'd just see the champions. But as you see these roles, you then get a sense of what sort of a team you're going to be and therefore what champions it would actually infer you should play. So the 2 potential roles that top lane would play would be duelist, which could be a bruiser or a carry, and is a guy who potentially just trying to win his lane hard and get an advantage. You could be a tank, which infers that I'm willing to play, like safe, I'm willing to play for items, I'm willing to play for the team in the team fights. I think that's good for top lane. So then you'd also get a sense of, am I going to get a split pusher? Am I going to get the guy who's going to join the team fight? You can now play differently as the bot lane. I think that if you have, instead of support, I would call the role, I would have 2 roles for that. One is shot caller, like you say. The other one would be called vision and follow-up. So his job is to ensure we have good vision and ensure he follows up on things that people like the jungler and the mid laner maybe want to do. Mid lane, I think I would just still call mid lane. And I would rename AD carry to farm carry, more on sort of the sense of main carry and daughter. And you'd even get the sense from that. I'd give them a little drop down. This is something I actually want to incorporate into this concept. They sort of say, like, I prefer to play lane dominant, or I prefer to play for skirmishes, for example. So you know if he's just going to farm for the team fight, or if he's willing to come and do other things and rotate out a lane and play for the objectives more. So I would say it would be cool if also these roles came with sort of like a style and a strategy drop down next to them. And the style one would be individually, where you infer like roughly like how you're going to play. There'd be a bunch of set presets in that. Overall strategy would be to vote within the team. We want to generally play for team fights with this comps. We want to generally play just separate lanes. We want to get all the dragons with this one. Whatever it might be. I'd love it if you had these options, because all these things combined, it'd still be the same champions potentially picked and go into the draft and go into the game, but we'd already have a sense beforehand of who my teammates are, how they want to play, how they see themselves, how they see the champion they're picking. I think that would be fantastic for the game potentially. Justin Reed, you have mentioned before how in Asia, CS is not much played due to social factors relating to their LAN cafe environment, which leads them to play either Korean-made variants of CS or games like League. Do you think something similar could occur in NA with Valorant if it becomes the tactical shooter people go to in the region? No, because there's not the LAN cafe environment. Like, that's the key part, is the LAN cafe basically is like inhibiting people from getting to or even knowing games like CS exist. That's not a problem. Like, people know Valorant exists, they just play it or they don't. So I actually think with Valorant, it's going to go the other way. Like, I like Monty's point he made about Valorant many times to me publicly on the Flashpoint Q&A times, that he thinks Valorant, because it's introducing so many people from the League world who didn't play CS or FPS games to FPS in a CS type game, he thinks it's inevitable. Some of them then give CS a try when like the major's going on, see how good it is, and it'll be way easier to understand, and just end up being CS fans as well, or CS fans instead. So I'll say, even for pro players, I think you'll have way more go the other way. Like, you might see someone follow Nitro or Som or someone like that, not really Som, but you know, that sort of a player over to a game like Valorant and watch it. Like, I gave it a chance when I saw some of the top players were playing when the Pop Flash tournament was on, but I think eventually you might see more coming the other way, that people will, some of the beloved names that are now in Valorant, top players or up-and-coming players that went to Valorant, might actually come back to CS, and some of their fans will follow back. And as I say, for majors and big tournaments or big moments, people will be more willing to click the link than they would if they were already a League or a Dota or a whatever else fan, PUBG fan or something. Toxic or Toxic. Recently, you've mentioned the likes of Dorper and Perks coming out with a controversial opinion on coaches in League of Legends. Actually, not that controversial, by the way. A lot of players think that way. They just don't say so publicly. It doesn't go down well with fans, and all coaches for that matter. I was wondering if you could elaborate on what you picture as the perfect coaching situation for a team. Would it consist of an analytical coach that builds around strategies, people like LS? Next to that, maybe a motivational coach or some sort of social coach that keeps the team on the same page and help them build a relationship with each other. Or are there any other kind of roles that you would put in there? Right, the main issue that Dorper and Perks have is they are so absurdly smart, transcendently smart about League, that they effectively are coaches playing the game. They're like when Peyton Manning was a quarterback for the Colts and the Broncos. He was the offensive coordinator. So as a result, to him, I'm sure offensive coordinators are like mildly overrated. Now, he's probably never going to say that about that Tom guy from the Colts, because that guy probably helped him learn the game. But I mean, listen, go look who was his offensive coordinator when he was on the Broncos. Definitely were overrated. It was Peyton Manning doing that. So the problem is, they have aspects to what they can do in the game and with their teammates that other players, even some of their teammates, can't do. And so because they're filling it in, they don't see the lack of it in other players. So they're thinking, well, I get this already, so what would the coach even be doing? And Perks just came from a super team where most of them knew how to win the game. So let's see what he thinks after playing in another lineup. So to me, he just doesn't appreciate what the coach can do for the lesser players. Like, the joke is, Dorper did explain all the things a coach could do, and those are all really valuable things. He just didn't see it as things he needed necessarily. I think I would have a big coaching staff. I would do it NFL style. So I'd have one guy or a couple of guys who were just nerds, getting me raw data, just mining stuff for me. I'd have people who are like strategical coach, maybe even two, and they have to work together on the game plan and come up with how they're going to use the players, champions that they have at the moment, what's currently available in the meta, what the other teams like to do, and construct like coherent drafts. My emphasis would always be, I always want a coherent draft over one that has good champions but it's disjointed. Then I would be the head coach, presumably, and I would be the guy who'd be an authority figure and a philosophical leader of the team, and I would never get the friends relationship. I would be more like a mentor if I had a closer relationship with a player, or I'd have a distance and we'd be professional. I'd have positional coaches, but they're not there to literally tell you what to do. They're just there to coach you and help you and be additional support, or show you what some players doing at your position in another region and contrast it and find little clips for you. I'd have a sports psychology person. I'd have them there just to deal with conflicts and people's issues or individually. And then I'd have a guy, kind of like the social guy or something, kind of like a hype man. I'd have someone where in the past this was a role played by people like Aaron Ayre. I'd have someone like that, a great guy to have around. He's going to lift your spirits. He's going to know where to talk to you. He's going to know where to take you out of the game and do something fun with you, to take your mind off something. He's going to know when to motivate you to practice or tell you can beat this Korean team. Like, I'd have someone like that in the team, certainly to kind of round out the core of it. I think TSM's always lacked someone like that because they had that stupid element of Reggie just sitting there with his big head going, you perform, boys, you represent me, and then being garbage on the international stage. I guess they do represent him after all. They did a great job, Reggie. Lager15, do you think players like Alu and Nico ever get that they're their biggest enemies? The simple answer is no, not really. I mean, both these people are people I know who in real life have done some pretty stupid stuff, especially like irresponsible stuff. So then when you see that bleed into some of their career decisions and how they've been as teammates, I don't think they get it. I think they actually think that they're medium to good guys, quite frankly. And you know what? Generally they are. So the problem is, I will say, between the two of them, I actually think Alu, even though he's arguably done more shady stuff, I think he's actually come off looking better. Like, his public comments after he was criticised seemed a bit more reflective and like he was open to the criticism, whereas Nico just flat out denies it or just claims that because you don't know specifically exactly why what he said, you know, that sort of it just plays silly games basically. So I don't think they do get that they're their biggest enemies, because guess what, they have a victim mentality, or they're just tyrants, so they just blame others. They just cut and change people, right? I mean, these are both people who never understood how underrated their IGLs are and thought their great IGLs were overrated, so more fool them, right? NA Kerfuffle. Here's the thing, Thorin. This year, an OGN-esque trailer for the LCS season would have been amazing, particularly due to the source material of Bjergsen and Doublelift retiring. For example, you probably could do a lot with a time theme, resetting the clock, or a void theme, the black hole created by the explosion of a star. If you had to create an opening trailer for the LCS for this season, what would the theme be? This is why I actually want to create trailers. Like, for some of the future Flashpoint ones, I want to be more involved with being creative on them, because I don't want it to just be like you pick an art theme and then you make the players work with it. I prefer it to make the storylines of the players work into the theme. So what I would like to do is this. I would like to show like a gym or a stadium or something. Let me think how to explain this. All right, how about this? I'll give you the overview and then I'll set the scene for you, right? So, by the way, editor, clip the scene aspect. That's going to bang as a clip, mate. So the overall theme would be like Perks' comment to just straight Thanos the league, like Avengers Infinity War. Forget that endgame exists. And then you got all the stars of the LCS that are still there, sort of rising up to fight against him or show that they're going to contest him. And then you leave on some big like crisis moment of like, what's going to happen? So picture this, right? You're in a stadium. It's an empty stadium. Fitting for the moment, right? But then you do that thing where you like flash in, like you fade up, like fans, and then you fade up like TSM, like Cloud9 fans, a thing, a CLG wins in Madison Square Gardens. You flash up like some of the quotes and people like that. And then what you're doing is you're going to then start to focus in, and as you flash in different finals, you just see this theme that it's like Doublelift and Bjergsen, all of Doublelift Bjergsen, and that's just Doublelift Bjergsen. And then you just sort of like, you shut them out, like it's light goes out, and then the whole stadium's dark. And then all of a sudden you just hear like and then like a light just slowly fades up and you see the outline and it's Perks. And Perks is stood there. It's just a black outline, and then he like flashes up. He's got like demon red eyes. He's doing like an anime look. And then he surrounded as the lights come up by all his trophies, his medals, like finals, finish, like all that shit's behind him. Then you just see flashes of his best moments, like LeBlanc Yasuo kills against SKT, Season 7, Season 9, his LeBlanc and Season 8 against RNG, Game 5, G2 wins MSI, like they won LEC again, this is the G2 era, whatever, all that stuff. You have quotes from EU players, including Perks and his former teammates, mocking the LCS as a region, retirement home, making banter jokes on streams, on shows, on interviews, and then you show flashes of websites though. You do a cut, flashes from websites that show like Perks to join Cloud9, Perks to leave G2, Carlos and a controversy over what Perks denied opportunity to go to Fnatic, Perks moving to NA for records. You show all this stuff here. Then cut to him in a Cloud9 jersey. He was in a G2 jersey before. Cut to him in a Cloud9 jersey. And he says some sort of shit like, it's going to be easy to dominate this weaker region after all I've done. Watch me. And then hero music. All of a sudden, though, he hears some music. Hero music starts to rise up. The camera does like a... almost like that moment where, like, in Endgame, actually, when the fucking Captain America guy, like, pulled the hammer, spoiler. And it's Jensen. And Jensen's like, I was here first. And does like an anime point. Power of Evil comes out. Don't underestimate me, friend. You know, doing like one of those, I don't know what he would do, he's German, and he. Someday comes out, just pauses. No. Jizuke, you again. The LCS. That's why I'm about 100 times better. That was off the top of my head. About 100 times better than anyone who ever worked for Riot. Get on my level. Crazy Leprechaun. What is your favourite CSGO match to re-watch? I started watching around the Berlin Major, so that's like September 2019, and I've only seen highlight reels of some earlier matches. Well, lucky for you, and I'll put it in the description box, I actually did an article on this a couple of years back called Thorin's 10 series CSGO fans need to see. So you're going to find a load of them in there, but I'll pick out like a few more recent ones. I mean, you've already seen them apparently since you start watching this era, but for anyone who isn't you, I would say some recent classics would be like Team Liquid versus Astralis in the ESL New York semi-final. Thought it was a banger series. Mouse Sports versus Astralis in the ESL Pro League Season 10 finals semi-final. Super epic shit. I'll even pick an online one. How about the IEM Beijing Haidan Europe final where Na'Vi was playing against Vitality? It was basically the Simple versus Ewu show. Epic stuff. If you want some older ones from the period you're asking for, I already gave you that list, but I'll pick a couple more out from memory. Right, so let's go with... Obviously, we need teams like Virtus Pro. So one I definitely didn't have on that list was Virtus Pro versus TSM best of 5 final. One of the first best of 5 finals, maybe even the first actually, between two top teams at the time who could both contend for world number 1 at ESL Dubai Invitational 2015. Just really, really solid stuff. Again, just go back and watch. You'll be very surprised by some of the players and what they do and some of the things, but it'll be interesting, and it's still some high level play. Let's take a classic, Simple on the rise. How about the one that made me... This is the series, I'm not even joking. When I finished watching this series, that's when I made a bunch of those tweets, where basically, I'm not exaggerating, I knew in that moment, this guy, Simple, can be the best player to ever play Counter-Strike. Any version. So I'm going to pick out the Fnatic versus Team Liquid semi-final from ESL 1 Cologne 2016. This is the Fnatic that had won the 6 tournaments in a row earlier in the year and at the end of the latter year. This is a team that already is in the semi-finals. Looks like they're going to go to the final, play SK and be the final boss. But Simple has another storyline in mind. Just watch what he does in this series. One you've got to watch, especially if you don't know the outcome. Just go watch it without knowing anything about it. Go watch LDLC versus Fnatic in the DreamHack Winter 2014 quarterfinals. So it's a major in the quarterfinals. Here's the storyline. At 2 tournaments previously, Fnatic's like rocked the LDLC guys. Fnatic's number 1 in the world. LDLC's clear number 2. They're meeting in the quarterfinals. And so if you want to win the major LDLC, you're going to have to beat Fnatic. And this is a really fun series. And then let's do another Simple one more recent. Let's take a classic Simple because you didn't see him. You only saw from 2019 onwards. 2018, obviously the Mouse Sports one from the final Star Series Season 4, but that's already in my article. So I'll say instead, one that's always forgotten is when he played against the SK Gaming that had Stewie 2K in it at Star Series Season 5, the next season, in the quarterfinals I think it was quarterfinals. He played SK, and this is the series where map 1, super epic between him and coldzera, but then coldzera cools off because coldzera wasn't as great a player back then, and for the whole series, Simple gets, I think, something like 97 frags or like almost 100 frags over 3 maps, so you know he really goes ham to win this series. Like, this is some really special stuff. Impulsive, you seem to be a big fan of Nolan's work. What would your top 3 Nolan movies look like and why? Right, number 3... I thought this one out, actually, because obviously I want to do a good order for this. So for number 3, I'm going to go with Inception. Now, it's a sick heist movie. Heist movies are always fun. You have to put the pieces together clever. You have to have a few twists. You have something smart, something unexpected happens. They do all that very, very well. I think this movie only really falls apart in what I'll call the lowest level, to not give any spoilers, if you know what I mean. And aside from that, it's just a fantastic movie. It's one of those ones I watched at the cinema. I was like, this is amazing. And also, I'll have a video, actually, on a different channel coming up in the near future, which has a very interesting addition to that movie that I came up with. Spoiler. Memento has to be number 2. What a fucking amazing movie. It's so compelling to watch, even if you've seen it before. That's one of the things about Christopher Nolan movies. You can watch his best movies with all the plot twists and all things, and you can rewatch them and the plot just still works. That's because he's a master at his craft. So very compelling. It's confusing, but in a good way. It tickles your brain, makes you start trying to figure things out or think of something or infer one thing. And think, oh, I was wrong about that. You get profound insights just thrown out willy-nilly about the human condition in that movie. I thought were very interesting. And number 1, you might have heard me say this before, The Prestige. I think it's got an almost perfect script. The execution is incredibly high level and so well fit to what they're trying to tell a story of. It's almost Alan Moore-esque in how the story fits together like clockwork. I like the way the overall theme of a magic trick actually ties in, but you only notice at the end, into how the story was told and how specific scenes were shown to you to make you think one thing without overtly lying to you, but by just not showing you the other thing that you later find out and then changes your whole perspective on everything. Also got an amazing cast, by the way. Put it this way, Scarlett Johansson's in that movie and there's no complaints to be made about her. She does a great job. I know people are going to be like, where are the Dark Knight movies? Like, first of all, Batman Begins is mad overrated. It's probably his worst movie in my opinion. And I think the 2 Dark Knight movies are really good movies, but they have really big problems in the 3rd act. And the 3rd act just means they don't get into my top 3. Pronogo, thinking back to your favourite versions of Counter-Strike, what was the best version of the original CS, e.g. 1.3, 1.6, etc., and what defining characteristics set it apart from current CSGO? Right, the current CSGO part's a bit tricky, but we'll go for that. So my favourite, in terms of I think it's just the best compromise and still an extremely high-level version of Counter-Strike, is CS 1.3, because it didn't have as many bugs, but you could still move without, like, basically, if you move in CS, you can't like bunny hop very fast. And if you jump, you sort of slow a little bit in CS 1.6 when you land on the ground. It's a bit like that in CSGO. In 1.3, you jump and you land and there's nothing, there's no inertia. There's nothing stopping you. You can jump again. And so everyone who doesn't know the game is going to go, everyone's going to be bunny hop on all the time. They weren't doing that in Pro Player. But it did mean you could jump and you could dodge and you could evade a bit more. And so that was brilliant. That made it, being an AWP way harder. That made like trying to fight people when you're on eco a bit easier potentially, because you can dodge and weave and jump around and try and swarm the guy with people coming from all directions onto the AWP or something. So it was just very, very cool. It had everything really well done. And also the spray was a little bit different in that version for the rifles, particularly the Colt, and it was way better in my opinion. Like you could full auto spray. Like there was a guy who played for a team back in the day, Game Online, in the early days, like 2001, and later he played for Cosa Nostra at CPL Oslo 2002. He was called Smurfer, and if you ever go watch any of his demos, it was what he had on Nuke, I remember. I think he was playing against a Finnish team, so maybe like Apostrophe or someone, or Exodia or something. What would that team be called? I'm not sure, but he's playing for, I think, Game Online at the time. Just watch the way he sprays. It's so sick. It was really, really good. Obviously, CSGO has never had spray as good as that. CSGO spray is more like, it's not even as good as 1.5 spray. So that's why, to me, people like Legion Megas are just gods in CSGO the way they spray, because they almost just break the game. I don't know how they do it. 1.6 was a good game, but if you know what it lacked compared to 1.3, where the jump problem made it worse, the switching speed between the AWP and the weapons is slower, the rifles have worse spray with a little bit more randomization around, I'm going to guess like bullet 5 to 7 or something like that, or 6 to 9. What else is different? not really sure on that one, actually, if there's much more relevant to go into right now. Some of the classics that I appreciate what was very good about them, but I see why they didn't continue on because I don't think Counter-Strike as a game would be as big, was in the betas. There's a couple of betas that were really next level. The most classic one is beta 5.2, when the M4 actually had a scope on it, and one of the most dominant weapons was a P90. So you can imagine it was a super arcadey, brawly, aggressive, almost Quake-esque arcadey version of Counter-Strike. A very, very good one. And I know that people like BDS who are old schoolers, similarly, another one they appreciated was in like Beta 7, where it was still a very arcadey game, quick, fast, you can move, do a lot of stuff, and it was way more like something like, if you've ever played like Return of Castle Wolfenstein or Enemy Territory, where the engine's more smooth and you can spray and shoot a lot easier, but as a result, if you're very skilled, you can dominate like Quake, whereas just a lot of randomness slowed the game down a lot and made it just a lot worse, in my opinion, on almost every version of CS subsequent to the betas. Peter Reds, Thorin, in your opinion, is NACS dead, or will this be another CS rebirth like the one post iBuy power ban? Right, it's not dead, it's far from dead. But not least because the top talent has stayed and we still have some fantastic teams, and as soon as you can go to LANs again, we're going to have massive LANs in NA and there'll be people wanting to play for it. There's a lot of salary in the game, there's leagues like Flashpoint, there's all sorts of reasons why people are going to stick around. But in terms of the next generation of players, the ones that were going to become the next stars, and the ones that are going to become the next players that can become the stars, that's where I'm concerned, because the next players that are going to become the stars, some of them have gone to Valorant. I think some of them might come back, but we'll see. And then the people who haven't even yet started to play CS and become the next rising talents, I do have a concern that in the short term, they might be playing Valorant now instead of CS. And so we don't get to see them in CS initially, and they'd have to actually make a hard transition if Valorant fails. So I might not have as many people coming into the scene in that regard. That might be where there's an issue. The last question is by Zoomba. And it's a simple one. He just says, which episode of Crackdown did you enjoy filming the most? I thought the one with Wonder was good for the Bjergsen discussion. We should have really had that as a separate episode, but we thought it was just going to be a brief segment. But yeah, that was a pretty good discussion. I thought no one's ever put those points to Dom about Bjergsen. I thought it was pretty good back and forth. The Carlos one recently was very fun because I just knew it would be. That's why I purposely booked that one and set him up. And if you notice, I was almost like throwing him alley-oops so that he could deliver the straight fire aspects. Because I just knew I know how to bring the best out of something like that. Funnily enough, some of his players, Caps and Perks, when they were on the show, I just know how to get the best out of guys. I know how to sort of prod them or draw them into something or challenge them in the way that they'd never get challenged if they went on an Euphoria or some other podcast. So I think some of those ones would be some of my favourites. Right, obviously, thanks to GamerSups and all that. If you want to ask a question for a future one, the thread's below. If you donate $10 or more on Patreon. And also there's the Discord channel where you can go submit questions there. This video was kindly supported by Laggy15, Pronogo, Andrew, Dean Tanglis, Animosity, ErikHillestad, Andreas Kroknes, Hades, Jensen Goh, Zoomba, JDubs, Tobias Bernasconi, Alexander Rao, and as always, a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Want to ask a question in one of my monthly video AMAs? Do you want teasers? See who's going to be on my next interviews and shows? Maybe you want to take part in a discussion with me where we go anywhere. We had a mad one talking about chess the other month. If so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati today at the link in the description box below.